You believe that when someone is declared dead, they're gone. Brain activity flatlined, heart stopped, lungs collapsed. The person you knew has ceased to exist, and what remains is just meat and bone waiting to rot. That's what they teach in medical school. That's what every textbook, every protocol, every certification exam hammers into the minds of doctors and coroners. Death is irreversible. Death is final. Death is silent. But on a freezing November morning in a county morgue in Portland, Oregon, a forensic pathologist named Dr. Richard Brennan learned that everything he'd been taught was a lie. Because when he made the Y incision across the chest of a 37-year-old woman who had been dead for 14 hours, she screamed, not a gasp, not the release of trapped gases that sometimes mimic sound, a scream, a full-throated, agonized, unmistakably human scream that echoed off the tile walls and shattered the clinical silence of the autopsy suite. And what they discovered in the hours that followed didn't just challenge medical logic, it destroyed it. The woman's name was Catherine Marsh. She'd been brought to the morgue the previous evening after being found unresponsive in her apartment by her landlord. No signs of trauma, no evidence of foul play. The paramedics who responded had worked on her for 43 minutes, following every protocol, administering every drug in their arsenal. Nothing. No pulse, no electrical activity in the heart, pupils fixed and dilated, body temperature dropping. She was pronounced dead at the scene at 6:47 p.m. and transported to the Multnomah County Medical Examiner's office for a routine autopsy to determine cause of death. Dr. Brennan had been a forensic pathologist for 19 years. He'd performed over 4,000 autopsies. He'd seen bodies pulled from rivers after weeks of decomposition. He'd examined victims of industrial accidents who'd been crushed into shapes that barely resembled human beings. He'd opened up people who'd been shot, stabbed, burned, poisoned, and torn apart by machinery. Nothing fazed him anymore. The dead were puzzles to be solved, questions to be answered. They didn't frighten him. They didn't disturb him. They were just work. Catherine Marsh was scheduled as his second case of the day. He'd already completed a straightforward overdose that morning, a 22-year-old man with enough fentanyl in his system to kill a horse. Now, at 10:15 a.m., he stood over Catherine's body, which had been removed from refrigeration and placed on the stainless steel examination table. His assistant, a diener named Marcus Webb, who'd worked in the morgue for 7 years, had already photographed the body, taken fingerprints, and collected the preliminary external evidence. Catherine looked peaceful. That's what Brennan noted in his initial observations. Her face was relaxed, almost serene. No signs of distress, no indication that her final moments had been painful or traumatic. She was a small woman, maybe 5'3", with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore the clothes she'd died in, yoga pants and an oversized sweater. There were no needle marks, no bruising, no petechiae in the eyes that might suggest strangulation or asphyxiation. Just a woman who appeared to be sleeping, except for the fact that she was cold and gray and had been dead for 14 hours. Brennan began his external examination, speaking into the overhead microphone that recorded every detail for the official report. Height, weight, identifying marks, a small scar on her left knee, a tattoo of a hummingbird on her right shoulder blade, no defensive wounds, no signs of sexual assault. Everything by the book, methodical and professional. Marcus assisted, taking additional photographs, labeling evidence bags, maintaining the chain of custody that would be crucial if this turned out to be anything other than natural causes. Then came the internal examination. Brennan picked up his scalpel, the blade catching the harsh fluorescent light. He'd made this incision thousands of times, Y-shaped, starting at each shoulder, meeting at the sternum, and then continuing down to the pubic bone. It was muscle memory at this point, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done the same task so many times it had become automatic. He pressed the blade to Catherine's right shoulder and began to cut. The scream came the moment he reached her sternum. It wasn't loud at first. It started as a low moan, rising from somewhere deep inside her chest, building in intensity and pitch until it became a full-throated shriek that filled the autopsy suite with a sound that didn't belong in a room full of the dead. Brennan jerked back, the scalpel clattering to the floor. Marcus stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of instruments that crashed to the tile with a sound like breaking glass. And Catherine Marsh, who had been dead for 14 hours, and who had no heartbeat and no brain activity and no possible way of producing sound, screamed. Her eyes didn't open. Her body didn't move. There was no thrashing, no convulsing, no sudden return to life like you see in movies. Just that sound, that horrible, agonized sound pouring out of her like she was being torn apart from the inside. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, though Brennan would later say it felt like hours. And then it stopped. Abrupt. Final. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the scream itself. Brennan's first coherent thought was that he was having a stroke, that his brain had misfired, created an auditory hallucination because what he'd just heard was impossible. But then he looked at Marcus, saw the terror in his assistant's eyes, and knew they'd both heard it. Marcus was pressed against the far wall, his face the color of old newspaper, his mouth opening and closing without producing words. The recording equipment had captured it too. The audio levels on the monitor had spiked, the waveform showing the unmistakable pattern of a human scream. Brennan's hands were shaking. He'd never had shaking hands before, not even during his first autopsy as a medical student. He forced himself to approach the table, to look at Catherine's body. She lay exactly as she had before, no change in position, no rise and fall of the chest. He pressed his fingers to her carotid artery, knowing what he'd find. Nothing. No pulse. The skin was cold, the flesh firm with the early stages of rigor mortis. He grabbed a pen light and checked her pupils. Fixed and dilated, no response to light. Every indicator of death was present and accounted for, except for the scream, except for the sound that still echoed in his ears and would continue to echo for the rest of his life. Marcus finally found his voice. "What the fuck was that?" His words came out strangled, barely above a whisper. "What the fuck was that, Doc?" Brennan didn't answer. He couldn't, because he didn't have an answer. Instead, he did what he'd been trained to do. He picked up the scalpel, his hands still trembling, and prepared to continue the autopsy. Marcus stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You're not seriously going to keep cutting. We have to know," Brennan said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, distant and mechanical. "We have to understand what happened." She screamed. "Dead people don't scream." "I know. So what are you doing?" "My job?" Brennan completed the Y incision. His movements slower now, more cautious, as if expecting the body to scream again at any moment. It didn't. He peeled back the skin and muscle, exposing the rib cage. Used the bone saw to cut through the sternum, the high-pitched whine of the blade setting his teeth on edge. Removed the chest plate. And then he saw Catherine Marsh's internal organs, and his blood turned to ice. Her heart was moving, not beating. There was no rhythmic contraction, no pumping of blood. But it was moving, twitching, spasming, like something was inside it trying to get out. Brennan had seen cadaveric spasms before, random muscle contractions caused by the release of calcium ions after death. But this was different. This was sustained, purposeful movement. And it wasn't just the heart. The lungs were moving too, expanding and contracting slightly, even as if trying to draw breath even though they were no longer connected to a functioning respiratory system. Marcus saw it too. Oh Jesus Christ. Brennan reached for his instruments, his scientific mind overriding his primal fear. He needed to examine the heart, to understand what was causing this impossible movement. He clamped the major vessels and carefully removed the organ, placing it in a steel tray. It continued to twitch in his hands, the muscle fibers contracting in patterns that made no biological sense. He made an incision in the left ventricle, opening the chamber to examine the interior. That's when he found the tumor. It was small, maybe the size of a grape, attached to the interior wall of the heart. But it wasn't like any tumor Brennan had ever seen. It was dark, almost black, with a texture that looked more like insect carapace than human tissue. And it was moving, pulsing, as if it had its own heartbeat independent of the organ it had grown inside. Thin, thread-like structures extended from the tumor, weaving through the heart muscle like roots through soil. Brennan's hands had stopped shaking. He was in full clinical mode now, his fear buried beneath layers of professional detachment. He removed a sample of the tumor, placed it on a slide, and examined it under the microscope mounted on the autopsy station. What he saw made him question whether he was still sane. The cells weren't human. They weren't even mammalian. The structure was all wrong, the nucleus too large, the cytoplasm filled with organelles he didn't recognize. And they were alive, actively dividing, consuming the surrounding cardiac tissue and replacing it with more of themselves. It was like watching cancer in fast forward, except cancer didn't move like this. Cancer didn't organize itself into structures that looked almost intentional, almost designed. He examined the lungs next. Found similar tumors in both organs, smaller than the one in the heart, but showing the same characteristics. The same black chitinous appearance, the same thread-like extensions, the same impossible cellular activity. He checked the liver, the kidneys, the spleen. Every major organ was infected, colonized. Whatever this thing was, it had spread throughout Catherine's entire body. But the worst discovery came when he examined her brain. Brennan removed the calvarium, the top of the skull, and carefully extracted the brain. It should have been soft, just starting to break down after 14 hours of death. Instead, it was firm, almost rigid. And when he made the first cut to examine the interior, he found that nearly 30% of the brain tissue had been replaced by the black tumor-like growth. It had concentrated in the brainstem and the limbic system, the most primitive parts of the brain. The parts responsible for basic functions and primal emotions. The parts that process pain. Marcus had been watching from a safe distance, his face still pale but his curiosity overcoming his fear. "What is it?" he asked. "Some kind of parasite?" "I don't know," Brennan admitted. "I've never seen anything like it." "Could it have killed her?" "It's the only explanation. These growths have compromised every major organ system. But the question is what they are and where they came from." Brennan spent the next 6 hours documenting everything. Photographs from every angle, tissue samples preserved in formalin, detailed notes describing the appearance and distribution of the growths. He sent samples to the state lab for analysis, to the CDC, to every expert he could think of who might be able to identify what he'd found. And then he did something he'd never done before in his career. He called the police. Because if Catherine Marsh had been infected with something, if this was some kind of biological agent, then there might be others. Her apartment needed to be quarantined. Anyone she'd been in contact with needed to be examined. This could be the start of an outbreak, a new disease that could spread through the population like wildfire. The police came, and so did the CDC. Catherine's apartment was sealed off, her belongings bagged and analyzed. They interviewed her friends, her family, her co-workers. Tested everyone she'd been in contact with in the weeks before her death, and found nothing. No one else showed any signs of infection. No one else had the black growths in their organs. Catherine Marsh was unique, an isolated case, which somehow made it worse because it meant they had no idea how she'd been infected or whether it could happen again. The lab results came back 3 weeks later. The tissue samples had been analyzed by the best pathologists and microbiologists in the country. Their conclusion was unanimous and terrifying. The growths were of unknown origin, not bacterial, not viral, not fungal or parasitic. The cellular structure didn't match anything in any database, and it was as if Catherine had been infected by something that didn't exist in any medical textbook, any scientific journal, any classification system humanity had ever developed. One researcher, a virologist from Johns Hopkins, offered a theory that kept Brennan awake at night. "What if it's not from here?" she'd said during a conference call. "What if this is something extraterrestrial or from some deep part of the ocean we've never explored? Something that found its way into a human host and adapted to survive there?" But that didn't explain the scream. That didn't explain how a woman who'd been dead for 14 hours, whose brain had been partially consumed by alien tissue, had produced a sound of such pure agony when Brennan's scalpel touched her chest. Unless the growths hadn't killed her consciousness, unless they'd trapped it, had kept some part of her aware and suffering even after her body had ceased to function. Brennan requested the audio recording from the autopsy, listened to it dozens of times, analyzing every frequency, every harmonic. And he heard something he'd missed in the moment, something that made his skin crawl. Beneath the scream, almost inaudible, were words, distorted and stretched, but unmistakably words. He ran the audio through enhancement software, isolated the frequencies, and played it back. "Please stop, please stop, please stop." Catherine Marsh had been conscious, aware, trapped inside her dead body, feeling everything, unable to move or speak or signal for help. And when Brennan had cut into her, when he'd opened her chest and exposed her infected organs to the air, she'd found the strength to scream, to beg him to stop, and to let him know that she was still there, still suffering, still experiencing every moment of her own autopsy. The recording was classified. The CDC buried the case under layers of bureaucracy and non-disclosure agreements. Catherine's family was told she died of a rare cardiac condition. Nothing contagious, nothing to worry about. Her body was cremated at temperatures high enough to sterilize any biological agent. The tissue samples were destroyed. The official report listed cause of death as undetermined cardiac event and left it at that. But Brennan knows the truth. He knows that Catherine Marsh died twice. Once when her body stopped functioning, and again when he completed the autopsy and finally severed the brainstem, ending whatever horrible half-life the growths had sustained. And he knows that she spent 14 hours trapped in her own corpse, conscious and aware, experiencing the cold of the morgue refrigerator, the handling of her body, the violation of the examination. And he knows that there's no way to test for this, no way to know if other people who've been declared dead are actually still conscious, still aware, still suffering in silence. He still performs autopsies. It's his job, his career, the only thing he's ever been good at. But now, before he makes that first incision, he talks to the body, explains what he's going to do, apologizes just in case. Just in case there's someone still in there, trapped and terrified, waiting for the final cut that will set them free. And sometimes in the dead of night, he wonders if Catherine was the only one, or if every body he's ever opened, in every corpse he's ever examined, had someone inside screaming where no one could hear, begging for mercy that never came, enduring horrors that the living can't imagine, all because we've decided that death is final and the dead feel nothing. The scream still echoes in his dreams, and beneath it, barely audible, those three words repeat endlessly. Please stop. Please stop. Please stop. But he can't stop. None of them can. Because the dead need to be examined, need to be understood, need to be processed and disposed of. And if some of them are still conscious, still aware, still capable of suffering, well, that's just another horror we'll have to live with. Another nightmare we'll have to bury along with the bodies. Catherine Marsh screamed during her autopsy. The recording proves it. The evidence is undeniable. But the world keeps turning, and the morgues keep operating, and the dead keep piling up. And somewhere in cold storage facilities across the world, there might be others like Catherine, trapped, aware, screaming into the void where no one can hear them. Sleep well,